Before I share two major questions for self-proclaimed atheists, here are a few conversations that I've heard online.
That religion is in essence nothing more than a mimetic entity that serves some kind of social purpose like this, that's what it's for, but isn't actually true. And perhaps my desire for my philosophical convictions to be, true is just too high a margin to demand.
There simply are no reasons for the existence of a God. To have a subjective experience, a personal experience of God. Well, we all know how easily people are fooled. We all know how easily people hallucinate, how easily they imagine, how easily they dream. So that's an extremely poor argument in favor of the existence of a God. So there are no good arguments in favor of a God, and that's all one needs to say.
Both made careers out of debunking Christianity, and a lot of their audience are die-hard self-proclaimed atheists. Now, the questions that I pose to you are intended to be contemplative. I'm not suggesting I have any answers, but they are valuable for religious and non-religious alike. But in this video, I'm speaking specifically to atheists, which for a very specific reason seem to have more trouble with this. Question number one, would you rather be in love or would you rather be right?
That'll never be a problem for me, because how could it even be a loving relationship unless you can both freely express disagreements and even negotiate resolutions in a meaningful way?
Truthfully, this is applicable to intimate relationships most often. I personally have plenty of times in my relationship wanted to be right instead of being in love. And these can oftentimes be in direct opposition. It's not very enjoyable or connecting to be trying to prove a point, to be forcing a point down someone else's throat. And this is where this question is a really good reminder for me in direct relationships, but also in any friendships or any relationship at all. Would I rather be right or would I rather be in love? I should add a caveat that this should be applicable to atheists and theists, people who fervently or zealously believe in their point of view. Would you rather be right about your perception of God, or would you rather lean into connection and love for your fellow man or woman?
I don't want to be wrong, but if I happen to be wrong, then I'd want someone to correct me as soon as possible so that I won't be wrong anymore. I would rather be corrected by a friend than an enemy, because they'll be more likely to correct me discreetly and respectfully rather than through public humiliation. And if they really love me, then they will correct me, because that means they're helping me to better understand. The people who love me are not going to let me recite lies and nonsense. Those who love me don't want to see me fooled or defrauded. Those who love me will want to protect my dignity while also helping me to be a better person than I am. I don't want to have to make another public apology admitting that I was wrong about something I said and that I should have known better. I know religious apologists don't know what that's like because they have no accountability, but those of us with honor also experience shame as one of our growing pains. I would much rather that those who love me catch whatever mistakes I might have made before they become a matter of public embarrassment. The same goes for anyone that I love. If one of my closest friends or family were to say that George Washington's troops won the American Revolution by first securing all of the airports in 1776, or if they said that injecting urine might cure cancer, or if they said that Columbus discovered Ohio in 1942, or that we never landed on the moon, or that the earth is flat, or whatever the error is, if I can show that it is an error, then I'm going to correct them. Not just out of love, because I would afford that same courtesy to strangers as well, out of simple respect. Now, if they refuse to accept reality, there's not much I can do about that. Sadly, I have plenty of friends and family who seem as though they only want to believe lies. If it's completely absurd, goes against all logic, and we can't show that there's any truth at all to it because it comes only from dubious sources and there's absolutely no reliable evidence for it, but there is plenty of strong evidence against it from every relevant field of study, then they're still going to believe it anyway. That's all they want to believe, whatever ain't true, because they think that makes them special somehow. Whereas, If it's something we can substantiate or verify in an instant, several different ways, corroborated by multiple reliable sources, then they don't even want to know about that. My own mother told me that if it's not what she was told to believe by her church or by her right-wing political propaganda sources, then she doesn't even want to know about it, especially when it is critically important and we can and have already proven that it's the truth. Me telling her that makes her want to know about it even less. She is determined to believe whatever her approved authorities told her to believe, simply because they told her to believe it, and she will not even consider nor even hear out anything else, no matter what. And once she knows that I'm about to contradict something that she was told to believe, she will yell over me, run out, slam the door in my face, cover her ears and scream, anything to keep from hearing forbidden knowledge that she must not think about. It's not just her either. Very often, when I offer to prove to some believer that what I'm saying is true and that what they're saying is false and that they're spreading lies, their counter is to ask me, what's wrong with lying? Or why does it have to be true before I believe it? Why won't you let me believe whatever I want to believe, even if it's not true? Because you're trying to teach sequestered students that it is true, dumbass. Quit lying to other people's kids. And my question to believers is, why would you want to be completely convinced of something that might not even be true? Or worse, that we already know and can show to be demonstrably false? The answer is that believers don't want to know what is or isn't really true. They just want to make believe in things that are not even possibly true. To me, that's not just irrational and illogical. That's insane. In some cases, that might mean that I love those people a little less, because it would mean that I have to treat them as if they're suffering dementia. Because that mindset literally is delusional by definition, being a persistent false belief that will not change, even in the face of evidence to the contrary. That's what a delusion is. And it means that the only thing we can do is maybe try to connect on some other level or topic, or we might have to end that relationship, because tragic though it is, the truth no longer matters to them, if it ever did, where it means everything to me. I've already lost most of my childhood relationships, and some of these folks could get over the fact that I didn't believe in their God, but when I didn't worship their orange God, when I had verifiable data against their dear leader, they cut off all communication. Believers will readily sever even the deepest ties over their preference for lies and nonsense. The truth is what the facts are. If you don't care what the facts are, then you don't care what the truth is. When someone descends that deep into delusion, to the point that they reject reality itself, then how can you even have a meaningful relationship with them anymore? I mean, if we're talking about your 80-year-old grandma who still believes in Copernican theory, like my grandma did when I was a kid, then the time to have that conversation was way back when you were 10 and already knew more than she knows now. If she ever had an ounce of curiosity, she wouldn't still believe in science that is 500 years out of date. And if she had any capacity, then she wouldn't believe in fairy tales either. But she already told you that everyone in heaven will be young again, in their prime, and that all of them will be living in mansions on streets made of gold. If that represents her level of aptitude, then how is she going to understand anything real? Don't even try to explain anything. If she starts talking stupid, just tell her politely that that's not true, Grandma. Don't go into why, especially not if you already know that she has a tendency to get violent whenever anybody tries to tell her how anything really is. Just show her videos of kitty cats being cute, or change the subject to something that reminds her what a good grandma she is, like you would with a golden retriever that makes homemade pies and cookies. But for anyone else in your same age bracket who doesn't apparently have a diagnosed reason for being that dumb, they should be corrected accordingly. If they're a friend, then show them how much you care by trying to help them understand their error so that they won't be in error anymore. Fix that, and they'll be a better person for it. And if there was ever any good in them at all, then they'll thank you for it.
The reason why I think atheists could particularly benefit from this question is pretty much all of the quotes I mentioned before from O'Connor, from Dawkins, there is an undertone of using rationality and logic to prove what's right, whereas faith, generally speaking, focuses on the emphasis of believing in something even without the claim of truth, whether through facts and figures, statistics, etc.
The facts and figures you mentioned are the evidence, which should be the basis of all arguments or positions, but that, as you pointed out, are discarded or ignored by the faithful. And speaking of being right, whenever I point out that faith is an irrational or illogical belief because it is neither determined nor corrected by evidence, believers often pretend as if faith depends on evidence, as if they came to their belief because they were compelled by evidence, which is a lie. But they accuse me of being the one lying about that. So thank you for admitting that I'm not lying, that you know as well as I do that faith is convincing yourself even without evidence and despite evidence to the contrary.
Question number 2, is it true or is it useful?
From my perspective, only accurate information has practical application. We make our plans based on what we know, and if our information is wrong, then our plans turn out wrong. But religious believers always reply with the one exception, the placebo effect, where, for example, someone is given a simple sugar pill, but they're told that it's an anesthetic. And this false belief tricks the mind in some people, leading them to think that the pain isn't as bad now. Of course, that doesn't work for everyone, and it doesn't work for anyone indefinitely. Ultimately, it comes down to a doctor lying to their patients. So even if it did work for a few people for a little while, it's still unethical. It's still a lie. And some of us don't like to be lied to. That's why we're not believers. Believers love to be lied to. They even pay liars to lie to them. And this reminds me of a debate that I had over a topic of whether religion does more harm than good, wherein another atheist argued that if there was ever a single incident where a beautiful lie might comfort someone in a grave situation, then we should just ignore all of the other lies and confusion, oppression, extortion, and abuse that the believer's religion had imposed on them and that they had to live through all of their life. But I note that those who come away from the faith most often balance this issue the other way, being embarrassed, ashamed, and often bitterly angry against everything their faith said to them or had done to them.
By all measurement of well-being, having a spiritual connection to a higher power is better than not.
No, it isn't, especially since there is no spiritual power to connect with. But we'll come back to that in a moment.
Here's a study of 125,000 people in 77 countries, which found that people who believed in God were happier, healthier, had a greater sense of well-being.
That's not true of me. I'm definitely happier as an atheist than when I was a Christian, because Christianity doesn't make any sense at all. And I was both unable to ignore or reconcile several of the many issues with that religion. When I moved on to other faiths, I found irreconcilable issues with them as well, until I realized that faith itself was the problem. I've heard similar sentiments from many other atheists too. In fact, I'm on the board of directors for American Atheist 501c3, and we have over 392,000 members who remain atheists because, by all measurement of well-being, it is better to accept reality than to be duped into believing stupid lies. I think it's better to be honest than religious. But your cited study did not interview me, and I doubt whether your study interviewed any of our hundreds of thousands of members either. And to be fair, I'm sure that you were not interviewed in this study, which reports that higher rates of belief in and worship of a creator correlate with higher rates of homicide, juvenile and early adult mortality, STD infection rates, teen pregnancy, and abortion. There are a number of other studies showing that the factions of dominant religion typically have the highest crime rate, with special emphasis on hate crimes. In general, the most religious countries have the highest murder rates, and the same is true of the most religious areas within the United States. The higher the religiosity of a given populace, the higher the murder rate. Secular nations, however, show the opposite tendencies, where the less religious they are, the more peaceful they tend to be, pretty consistently, with China being, I think, the one outlier. I've seen studies showing that evangelical Christians have the highest divorce rate and that fundamentalist Christian school students had a higher abortion rate than students in secular schools, back when our supposedly God given rights were still protected by the Constitution. Child Protection Services and other agencies report a significant majority of child abusers and molesters identified as very religious, and the study says that the more religious they are, the worse offenders they are, with more and younger victims. Of course, other studies show that violent criminals are almost always believers, and that religious people are more likely to condone the murder or torture of prisoners, where non religious people are more likely to consider all of that morally wrong. Your claim about religious belief leading to greater health ignores the blight of faith healers and other religious objection and rejection of various benefits of modern medicine, leaving dozens of children dead in the U.S. every year who could have been easily saved by routine practice. Did you even read the study you cited? Because it says that Christians trust the people close to them, like their neighbors, more than atheists trust their neighbors, which I understand because I've had religious extremists living on either side of my house a few times. That and Christians tend to be tribal, only tolerant of the people they know, where they often shamelessly announce that they distrust anyone or anything that they're not familiar with. But your study said that otherwise, atheists tend to trust people in general, even foreigners, more than believers do, because we are not susceptible to tribalism. We can't be. We don't even have a tribe. Your study went on to say that unbelievers are more pro-social and more environmental than believers, and that consequently atheists actually have more social capital than believers do. Of course, there are very few exceptional examples like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who admits that
I choose to believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
choosing to believe something means pretending. And she has admitted that she does so for purely emotional and indefensibly irrational reasons. But I have seen other studies like yours where Christians generally report being happier than unbelievers, because of course they report that. It's part of their conditioning in the faith, where they're trained from childhood to imagine that
I've got the joy, 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 joy down in my heart. Where? Down in my heart to stay.
Similarly, when polls asked Christians whether they went to church every Sunday, 22% of respondents said yes, but their cell phone data confirmed that most of them did not. Only about 5% actually showed up in church regularly. It's like if you ask someone whether they believe in God, and many people are culturally conditioned to answer as if they do, even when they don't. Look at Bernie Sanders, for example.
You said, God forbid. You say you're culturally Jewish? You don't feel religious. Do you believe in God, and do you think that's important to the people of the United States?
I am who I am, and what I believe in, and what my spirituality is about, is that we're all in this together. That I think it is not a good thing to believe that as human beings we can turn our backs on the suffering of other people.
Some people say that God is love, or that God is the universe, or that God is that we're all in this together. However, I believe in love and in the universe, and that we're all in this together. We're certainly not in this separately, but I don't believe in any God. And that was the question. So what if we rephrase that question to ask about an actual deity? And instead of asking, do you believe, because Americans are often conditioned to say yes to that too, then let's instead ask whether they're convinced that an actual deity really exists. It's exactly the same question, albeit paraphrased in different words so that it won't be recognized by our conditioning. Asked that way, I think you might get opposite responses from those who may start complaining about everything from their kidney stones to diabetes and about how nothing is as good as it used to be back before them other people came and started messing everything up. Because people lie, even in polls, and Christians are trained to lie, even to themselves. But let's just give you that point, that believers in whatever God or other spiritual nonsense are happier than those skeptical atheists who don't believe in any of that. Why? are believers happier? Obviously, it's not Jesus, because this happens with Jews and Muslims, Hindus, and everyone else, even with what you would agree are false religions with their false gods. Although you seem to realize that your God is false too. Your questions back my position that believers on some level know that what they pretend to believe is not really true. I think this is often the case, not always, of course, but I think there's many like yourself that you know. You don't believe in it because it's true. You believe in it because it's useful. Believers simply don't care whether it's true or not, as long as they believe that it is. And that's what you're pleading for. So if it's not true that the power of God is what's making people happy, then what is it really? Well, there are other studies showing how religious activity in the mind affects the physical brain the same way as taking narcotics. It's the same areas of the brain being affected the same way, which might explain why so many drug addicts convert to Christianity, trading one addiction for another. None of it is, more culturally acceptable anyway. Importantly, though, over a century ago, Bernard Shaw said the fact that a believer is happier than a skeptic is no more to the point than the fact that a drunken man is happier than a sober one. The happiness of credulity is a cheap and dangerous quality of happiness, and by no means a necessity of life. So let's look at that for a moment. In the musical Wicked, the green-skinned witch says to the leading man that he is not shallow, because if he was shallow, then he wouldn't be so sad. Because knowing things means knowing both the good and the bad, and realizing that we have a responsibility to do what we can when we can. Likewise, in the movie Baron Munchausen, Robin Williams' character occasionally separates his head from his body so that his brain can engage in serious academic study without distraction, because his body is only interested in the amusing vulgarities of the flesh. And in the TV show The Boys, the superpower of Sister Sage is that her brain keeps growing and regenerating itself, such that she is the smartest person on the planet. But her genius also means that she's not a lot of fun at parties. Imagine being the only sober adult in a whole world full of drunken children. So she occasionally performs lobotomies on herself to dumb herself down to the average level. While her brain repairs itself, she is momentarily dumb enough to enjoy simple games for simple minds. So if atheists are not as happy as believers, it may be because we're smarter than believers, just like this study says, noting a negative correlation between religiosity and intelligence.
I'm not saying you have to suspend your skepticism about specific gods, whether it's Christianity or Islam. If those don't resonate, if there's some elements of those religions that is against your values, I understand.
No, I don't think you do. Because it's not just that those two religions don't resonate with me. No religion does. And not just because every religion, and those two especially, do in fact go against my values rather violently. Is that there's no truth to either one. And there's a hell of a lot of lies in both of them. And they were both clearly made up out of exaggerations and embellishments and occasionally outright fabrications told by mere fallible, superstitious savages who obviously had no idea what they were talking about ever. How could I, and why would I, pretend as if either of these religions were true, when one, that'd be horrific for reasons you obviously haven't even considered, and two, I already know why they are not true.
But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
By your own tacit admission, there is no baby. Your query assumes that whichever God or religion doesn't matter because none of them are right. You don't even believe in God. You only believe in belief. And some people make believe simply because it makes them feel good to pretend. But you and I already know that there's no actual reality to it. So why pretend? At most, all you're pleading for is the placebo effect. But the placebo doesn't work if you already know that it's just a sugar pill. The truth matters to me, where truth is not even relevant to the make-believers, and I'm not going to lie to myself the way believers always have to.
Because it's clear from every standard of measurement that essentially it's pretty useful to believe in a higher power.
Not to me. It can't be. Lucius Seneca said thousands of years ago that religion is guarded by the common people as true, by the wise as false, and by the rulers as useful. By the terms of that analysis, Seneca the Younger would consider me wise, but I'm not a ruler, and neither are you. I'm not a deceiver either. I certainly will not lie to myself the way many religious believers have confessed to me that they do, that they know that they do, and somehow they do it anyway. I have to be honest with myself and others. So, not wanting to mislead or deceive anyone, I have no use for religious faith.
Sometimes that higher power doesn't have to be part of an organized religion. I can attest that oftentimes it is the hallucinations that Dawkins talks about. Simply have an altered state experience.
I already had an altered state experience. That movie was crap. But if that's the sort of thing you're looking for, let me suggest that you should instead listen to metal. This study says that heavy metal music is actually good for fans' mental health and that it helps them relieve stress from trauma, and it can even improve critical thinking. In fact, there's another study that says that heavy metal is the most intelligent musical genre, which is obviously absolutely true, as this heavy metal psychologist explains.
Now, one of my favorite studies on this topic comes from the National Academy for Gifted and Talented Youth in England, in which they surveyed over 1,000 students and found that a disproportionately high number of these high-achieving individuals listed heavy metal as their favorite type of music. Also, many studies have found that individuals who prefer listening to heavy metal music also tend to score higher on tests that measure creativity and critical thinking skills.
Whether it be entheogens, psychedelics, or a sweat lodge, or any kind of experience that genuinely impacts your physiology to a place where you're connected to something greater than yourself. You could call it God, whatever the case is, connect to that.
Been there, done that, both as a reborn Christian and then again as a neo-pagan spiritualist. I had the kind of experience that genuinely impacted my physiology. I was connected to, or foolishly thought I was connected to, multiple spiritualities that were all only imaginary.
My invitation is to ensure you have a connection because by all measurements, it's better, it's more useful, and it's going to lead to more life satisfaction.
But it didn't. And the real problem was trying to ensure that I had that connection rather than just assuming that I had one. Because even after exploring transcendental meditation and so many different types of spiritual experiences, I still couldn't show that there was any truth to it, any of it. It's all just make-believe. Thus, I come to the conclusion that by all measurement, it is better to be smart than stupid, better to be clean than addicted, better to have more social capital than less, and better to have real medicine than faith healing, and it's better to be truthful than faithful.